Ed Sullivan stood backstage at CBS Studio 50, holding a copy of Bob Dylan's proposed song lyrics that made his hands shake with anxiety. It was May 12, 1963, and the 22-year-old folk singer was scheduled to perform on The Ed Sullivan Show in 2 hours when Ed discovered that Bob planned to sing Talkin' John Birch Paranoid Blues, a satirical attack on the extreme right-wing organization that would almost certainly trigger a political firestorm. Ed's network executives were threatening to cancel the appearance rather than broadcast such controversial content. But when Ed approached Bob with the demand to change songs, the young singer's response was unlike anything Ed had encountered in his career. "Mr. Sullivan, if I can't sing what I believe, then I can't sing at all." What happened next would create one of the most controversial moments in television history and prove that some artists would rather walk away from fame than compromise their artistic integrity. Before you hear this explosive story, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to witness is the moment when Bob Dylan chose his principles over his career and changed the relationship between artists and television forever. To understand why Bob Dylan's song choice was so controversial, you need to understand the political climate of May 1963 and what The Ed Sullivan Show represented to mainstream American entertainment. The show was built on presenting safe, family-friendly content that wouldn't offend viewers or advertisers. Ed had always been careful to avoid political controversy, focusing on entertainment rather than social commentary, even as the civil rights movement and anti-war sentiment were beginning to reshape American culture. Bob Dylan was unlike any performer Ed had ever booked. At 22, he was already being hailed as the voice of a generation, a folk singer whose songs about social justice and political change were inspiring young Americans to question authority and demand change. But Dylan was also unpredictable, uncompromising, and completely uninterested in the kind of show business politeness that most Sullivan Show guests practiced. "This Dylan kid is different," Ed had told his wife Sylvia after first hearing Bob's music. "He's not trying to entertain people in the traditional sense. He's trying to wake them up, make them think." That can be powerful, but it can also be dangerous on television. People want to be entertained on Sunday nights, not challenged about their political beliefs. Ed had booked Bob Dylan based on his growing reputation and the enthusiastic recommendation of younger staff members who understood that Dylan represented something important in American music. But Ed had also assumed that Dylan would choose relatively safe material for his television debut, perhaps one of his love songs or a gentle protest song that wouldn't alienate mainstream audiences. The crisis began 3 days before the scheduled appearance when Bob submitted Talkin' John Birch Paranoid Blues as his performance choice. The song was a satirical attack on the John Birch Society, a far-right political organization that claimed communist infiltrators were everywhere in American society. Dylan's lyrics mocked the paranoid mentality of extreme anti-communist groups, using humor to expose what he saw as dangerous political hysteria. "This song will cause problems," Ed's head producer warned him after reviewing the lyrics. "The John Birch Society has powerful supporters, and they won't appreciate being ridiculed on national television. We'll get thousands of complaint letters, and some of our sponsors might pull their advertising." But the real crisis came when CBS network executives learned about Dylan's song choice. The network was already under pressure from conservative groups who claimed that television was promoting left-wing propaganda, and the executives were terrified of giving those critics more ammunition. "Sullivan, you need to make this kid change his song," the network executive told Ed during an emergency phone call. "We can't broadcast an attack on a political organization, no matter how satirical it is. Either he sings something else, or we cancel his appearance." Ed found himself in an impossible position. He genuinely admired Dylan's talent and believed that the young singer represented something important in American culture. But he also had responsibilities to his network, his sponsors, and his show that went beyond his personal artistic preferences. 2 hours before showtime, Ed knocked on Dylan's dressing room door, knowing that the conversation he was about to have could end either Dylan's appearance or their professional relationship entirely. "Bob, we need to talk," Ed said as he entered the small dressing room where Dylan was tuning his guitar and reviewing his lyrics. Dylan looked up with eyes that seemed older than his 22 years. "Let me guess. "The network doesn't like my song." Ed was struck by Dylan's lack of surprise or anger. It was as if the young singer had expected this confrontation and had already decided how he would respond. "Bob, the network executives are concerned about the political content of Talkin' John Birch Paranoid Blues," Ed explained. "They're worried it will be seen as taking sides in political controversies that television should avoid. They want you to perform a different song." Dylan set down his guitar and looked directly at Ed. "Mr. Sullivan, what song would they prefer? Something safe? Something that won't make anyone uncomfortable? Something that pretends the world is perfect and there's nothing worth singing about except love and happiness?" Ed could hear the disappointment in Dylan's voice, but also a determination that suggested this young man had principles he wouldn't compromise regardless of the consequences. "Bob, I understand your frustration," Ed said, "but television reaches millions of people, and with that reach comes responsibility. We have to consider how our content affects viewers and whether it serves the greater good." Dylan stood up, his slight frame somehow commanding the small dressing room space. "Mr. Sullivan, respectfully, I think you're wrong about what serves the greater good. Songs that make people think, that challenge them to examine their beliefs in their society. Those songs serve the greater good. Songs that just entertain people and send them to sleep serve nobody except the people who profit from keeping everyone asleep." Ed realized he was dealing with someone who viewed music not as entertainment, but as a form of social action. Dylan wasn't just another performer trying to make it in show business. He was an artist who saw his work as having moral and political significance. "What if we compromise?" Ed suggested. "You could perform Blowin' in the Wind, or one of your other songs that makes a point without directly attacking specific organizations." Dylan shook his head. "Mr. Sullivan, if I perform a song I don't believe in, just because it's safer, then I'm not really performing at all. I'm just pretending to be an artist while actually being a coward. The song I chose says what I want to say to America. If I can't say that, then I'd rather not say anything." Ed felt a mixture of admiration and frustration. He respected Dylan's integrity, but he also knew that this kind of uncompromising stance could destroy the young singer's television career before it started. "Bob, you're talking about walking away from the Ed Sullivan Show. Do you understand what that means for your career? This appearance could make you a household name. It could bring your music to millions of people who might never hear it otherwise." Dylan smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Mr. Sullivan, what good is bringing my music to millions of people if it's not really my music anymore? If I have to change what I want to say just to get on television, then television is changing me instead of me reaching people through television." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Ed trying various approaches to convince Dylan to choose a different song. He offered to give Dylan multiple songs instead of one. He suggested that Dylan could make a statement about his political beliefs in the interview segment. He even proposed having Dylan perform the controversial song on a future show when the political climate might be more favorable. But Dylan remained unmoved. "I came here to sing Talkin' John Birch Paranoid Blues because that's the song I need to sing right now, to these people, at this moment in history. If I can't do that, then this isn't the right time or place for me." With 30 minutes until airtime, Ed made the decision that would create one of the most controversial moments in television history. Rather than force Dylan to perform a song he didn't believe in, Ed allowed him to walk away from what would have been his national television debut. "Bob, I respect your decision," Ed said, finally. "I don't agree with it, but I respect it. You're giving up an incredible opportunity for your principles, and that takes courage even if I think it's misguided." Dylan packed up his guitar and prepared to leave CBS Studio 50. But before he left, he said something to Ed that would haunt the television host for years to come. "Mr. Sullivan, someday people are going to realize that artists who only say what's safe to say aren't really artists at all. They're just entertainers pretending to be artists. When that day comes, maybe television will be ready for songs like mine." Dylan's departure from the studio created immediate chaos for Ed's production team. With minutes before airtime, they had to restructure the entire show around the missing musical performance. Ed explained to the live audience that there had been a scheduling conflict that prevented the planned musical guest from appearing. But industry insiders quickly learned the truth about Dylan's political song and his refusal to compromise. The story of Dylan's walkout spread quickly through the entertainment industry and the folk music community. Some praised Dylan for standing by his principles and refusing to compromise his art for commercial success. Others criticized him for being inflexible and naive about how television and mass media worked. Dylan made the right choice, said Joan Baez, who had become friends with the young singer. Artists have to be willing to sacrifice commercial opportunities if those opportunities require them to betray their artistic vision. Bob showed that he's serious about his music being more than entertainment. But other industry figures disagreed. Dylan is being foolish, argued one music executive. Television exposure could have brought his message to millions of people. By walking away, he's limiting his influence to the people who already agree with him. That's not how you create social change. Ed Sullivan found himself defending both his decision to let Dylan walk away and the network's position on political content. In interviews, he emphasized that the Ed Sullivan Show had always tried to remain above political controversies while still presenting meaningful art. "I respect Bob Dylan's integrity," Ed told reporters. "But television has responsibilities to all viewers, not just those who agree with particular political positions. We have to find ways to present challenging art without dividing our audience along political lines." The long-term consequences of Dylan's Sullivan Show walkout were significant and complex. In the short term, it enhanced Dylan's reputation among folk music fans and political activists who saw him as someone who couldn't be bought or compromised. But it also limited his access to mainstream television, making it harder for him to reach broader audiences with his music. More importantly, the incident became a symbol of the tension between artistic integrity and commercial success that would define much of 1960s culture. Dylan's refusal to compromise became an inspiration for other artists who felt pressure to modify their work to suit television and radio programming requirements. The story took an interesting turn 2 years later when Dylan shocked the folk music world by going electric at the Newport Folk Festival, abandoning the acoustic folk style that had made him famous. Critics who had praised him for walking away from the Ed Sullivan Show now attacked him for betraying folk music traditions. Dylan's response to these critics echoed what he had told Ed Sullivan: "Artists must be free to evolve and express themselves authentically, even when that means disappointing people who preferred their previous work. I can't be the same person I was yesterday," Dylan said when asked about the criticism of his electric music. "If I tried to stay the same to please people, I'd be lying to them and to myself. Art has to be honest, even when honesty makes people uncomfortable." Ed Sullivan eventually came to view Dylan's walkout as one of the most important moments in his show's history, not because of what was broadcast, but because of what it revealed about the relationship between art and mass media. "Bob Dylan taught me something about artistic integrity that I hadn't fully understood before," Ed reflected years later. "He showed me that some artists will sacrifice everything for their principles, and that kind of commitment to authenticity is what separates real artists from people who are just trying to succeed in show business." The story of Dylan's Sullivan Show walkout became legendary in music history, representing the moment when a young artist chose artistic integrity over commercial opportunity. It demonstrated that the most important artistic statements sometimes happen when artists refuse to perform rather than when they agree to compromise. The incident also highlighted the growing tension between the emerging counterculture and mainstream American entertainment, a tension that would define much of the cultural conflict of the 1960s. If this story of artistic integrity and principled rebellion moved you, hit that subscribe button and tell us, would you be willing to walk away from your biggest opportunity if it required you to compromise your core beliefs? Sometimes the most important thing an artist can do is refuse to perform when the conditions aren't right for authentic expression.